He thought the stripes on his shoulders gave him the right to play God. Captain Brock Holloway was a veteran pilot for Meridian Airways, a man who believed the sky belonged to him, and that first class was reserved for people who looked like they belonged there. But when he marched down the aisle of Flight 404 to force a quiet black woman out of seat 1A to make room for his wealthy friend, he made the single biggest mistake of his career. He didn't know that the woman he was humiliating wasn't just a passenger. She was Dr. Elena Vance, a federal commissioner conducting a covert ethics audit, and she held the power to ground him for life. This is the story of arrogance meeting authority and the brutal karma that followed. The recycled air of the cabin always smelled the same, a mix of stale coffee, disinfectant, and the subtle metallic scent of ozone. For Dr. Elena Vance, it was the smell of the office. At 52, Elena carried herself with a quiet, deliberate grace that often went unnoticed by the loud and the flashy. She wore a simple charcoal blazer, her hair pulled back in a sensible bun, and her reading glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. To the untrained eye, she looked like a librarian, or perhaps a retired school teacher. There were no diamonds on her fingers, no designer logos plastered across her handbag. She sat in Seat 1A of the Meridian Airways Boeing 787 Dreamliner, undoubtedly the most coveted spot on the plane. It was a lie-flat pod with direct aisle access, intended for the ultra-wealthy or the corporate elite flying from Atlanta to Washington, D.C. Elena settled in, placing a thick binder on her tray table. The cover was plain blue, indistinguishable from a high school project, but inside were classified briefings from the Federal Transportation Commission. She wasn't just traveling. She was on her way to a Senate hearing regarding airline deregulation and passenger rights abuses. "Champagne, ma'am." Elena looked up. A young flight attendant, her name tag reading Sarah, hovered nearby with a nervous smile. Sarah looked exhausted. Her makeup was starting to crease, and there was a tremor in her hand as she held the tray. "Just water, please, Sarah." "Thank you," Eleanor said softly. Sarah blinked, surprised that the passenger in 1A had actually read her name tag. "Of course. Right away." As Sarah hurried off to the galley, Elena observed the cabin filling up. It was a Friday evening flight, the power corridor route. Lobbyists, tech CEOs, and old money families filled the first-class cabin. The noise level was rising. Men in expensive suits talked loudly about mergers, laughing with that specific booming cadence that suggested they owned the space they occupied. Elena returned to her binder, flipping a page. She was tired. It had been a 3-day conference in Atlanta, fighting tooth and nail against lobbyists who wanted to lower safety standards to increase profit margins. She just wanted 2 hours of silence and a nap. But peace, as Eleanor knew all too well, was a luxury rarely afforded to women like her, even when they had paid full price for it. A commotion at the front of the plane drew her attention. The heavy curtain separating the galley from the cabin whipped open. It wasn't a flight attendant. It was the captain. Captain Brock Holloway was a caricature of an airline pilot. He was tall, silver-haired, with a jawline that looked like it had been chiseled out of granite. He wore his hat even inside the plane, the gold braiding gleaming under the LED lights. He had the swagger of a man who hadn't heard the word no since the Reagan administration. He wasn't doing pre-flight checks. He was scanning the first-class cabin, his eyes darting from seat to seat as if looking for a lost item or a target. His eyes landed on seat 1A, on Elena. He frowned. It wasn't a confused frown. It was a frown of distaste, a micro-expression of annoyance that Elena had seen 1,000 times in boardrooms before she introduced herself as Commissioner Vance. "Sarah," the captain barked, not turning his head. The young flight attendant rushed out of the galley. Yes, Captain Holloway? Who is in 1A? He asked, his voice low but carrying in the hush of the premium cabin. That's a passenger, sir. Miss Vance? Sarah whispered, clutching a manifesto. Is she an upgrade? Holloway asked, essentially ignoring the fact that Elena was sitting 5 feet away and could hear every word. No, sir. Full fare. She booked it 3 weeks ago. Holloway scoffed, a sharp, derisive sound. He turned his back to Eleanor and leaned in closer to Sarah, looming over the young woman. Well, fix it. Beatrice is coming on board in 2 minutes. She missed her connection from London and needs to be in D.C. for a gala tonight. I promised her a seat up front. Sarah's face went pale. Captain, the cabin is full. Every seat is taken. Holloway turned slowly, his eyes scanning the cabin again. He looked at the men in suits, white, wealthy, powerful. He didn't linger on them. Then he looked back at Elena. A black woman in a plain blazer, reading a binder, looking small in the massive leather seat. Not every seat, Holloway said, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. We have an error in the manifest. I'm sure of it. Captain, I can't, Sarah stammered. You can and you will, Holloway snapped. Get her out of there. Move her to 34B. That's the last open seat, right next to the lavatory. Tell her it's a system glitch. Elena hadn't moved. She hadn't turned the page of her binder. Her heart rate remained steady, a skill honed over 20 years of high-stakes politics. She waited. She wanted to see how far this man would go. The air in the cabin shifted. People were starting to notice the tension. A tech executive in 2A lowered his noise-cancelling headphones. A socialite in 1B glanced over her sunglasses. Sarah approached Elena's seat. The poor girl looked like she was walking to her execution. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling. "Mom?" Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "Miss Vance?" Elena looked up, removing her reading glasses slowly. She offered Sarah a warm, patient smile, trying to ease the girl's terror. "Yes, Sarah." I am so incredibly sorry," Sarah began, her eyes darting back to where Captain Holloway was standing, with his arms crossed, watching like a hawk. "There seems to be a discrepancy with your ticket, a computer error." "A computer error," Elena repeated, her voice calm, velvety, and carrying a distinct authority that didn't match her plain appearance. "That's strange. I printed my boarding pass at the kiosk 20 minutes ago. It seemed fine then." I know, Sarah said, looking like she might cry. "But the captain, the system says we have a double booking. This seat, it's actually assigned to a priority global services member. And I suppose the other seat available is in economy," Elena asked. "Seat 34B, Sarah admitted, looking at the floor. "It's in the rear." Elena closed her binder. She placed her glasses on top of it. She didn't look at Sarah. She looked past her, locking eyes directly with Captain Brock Holloway. "I paid $3,000 for this seat, Sarah," Elena said, loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. "I have a bad back, and I have work to do before I land in Washington. I am not moving." Sarah flinched. She turned back to the captain, silently pleading for help. Holloway didn't hesitate. He adjusted his tie and strode forward, entering Elena's personal space. He towered over her, using his physical size as an intimidation tactic. It was a classic bully move. "Is there a problem here?" Holloway asked, his voice booming. "There is," Elena said, remaining seated. She didn't shrink away. "I believe you're trying to bump a paying customer for a friend, Captain, and you've chosen me because you think I'm the path of least resistance." Holloway let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Excuse me, I am the captain of this aircraft. I am responsible for the safety and security of every soul on board. If I say there is a manifest error, there is a manifest error. Now, you are delaying my flight. You need to grab your things and move to the back, or you will be removed from this plane." The first-class cabin was dead silent now. "Captain Holloway, is it?" Elena read his wings. "I know the regulations regarding involuntary bumping, Captain. Federal Aviation Regulation, Part 250. If you are bumping me involuntarily, you are required to provide a written statement describing my rights and the selection process for who gets bumped. I'd like to see that statement, and I'd like to know why the single woman in 1A was selected over the gentleman in 1B. Holloway's face turned a shade of red that matched the carpet. He wasn't used to passengers quoting FAA code, but his arrogance blinded him to the danger. He just saw a troublemaker. "Listen to me," Holloway hissed, leaning down, his face inches from hers. "I don't care what legal mumbo-jumbo you looked up on Google. This is my plane. My word is law. You are being disruptive. That is a federal offense. Now move." At that moment, the boarding door opened again. A woman swept in. She was draped in faux fur, holding a small, shivering dog in a designer carrier, and followed by a porter carrying 3 massive Louis Vuitton bags. "Brocky!" the woman shrieked. It was Beatrice van der Waal. She looked around the cabin with a sneer. "Oh God, it's so cramped in here today. Did you get my seat sorted? I simply cannot sit in the back. My sciatica is flaring up." Holloway's expression instantly shifted from rage to sycophantic charm. "Beatrice, just one moment. We're just clearing up some debris." He turned back to Eleanor, his eyes cold and hard as stone. "Last chance. Get up. Now." Eleanor looked at Beatrice, then at Holloway. She realized this wasn't just about a seat anymore. This was a test, and she was about to grade him. "Very well," Elena said softly. She stood up. Holloway smirked, triumph flashing in his eyes. He thought he had won. He thought he had crushed her. "Sarah," Elena said, gathering her binder, "please show me to seat 34B. "Yes, Ma'am," Sarah whispered, grabbing Elena's small carry-on. "I am so sorry." As Elena walked down the aisle, passing the expensive suits and the pitying glances, she didn't look defeated. She looked focused. She walked past Beatrice, who wrinkled her nose and audibly muttered, "Finally." Eleanor marched all the way to the back of the plane, the smell of the lavatory greeting her. Seat 34B was a middle seat, squeezed between a man eating a tuna sandwich and a crying toddler. She sat down. She didn't complain. She simply opened her blue binder again. She took out a pen, and on a fresh sheet of paper, she wrote down the time, the flight number, and 3 words at the top of the page: "Notice of violation." The plane taxied to the runway. Captain Holloway announced over the intercom, "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. We're looking at a smooth ride to DC. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the service." He had no idea that the woman in 34B wasn't just a passenger. She was the storm he never saw coming. The flight was turbulent, but not because of the weather. In the cockpit, Captain Holloway was laughing, recounting the incident to his co-pilot, a younger man named David, who looked uncomfortable. "Did you see her face?" Holloway chuckled, adjusting the autopilot. "Quoting regulations at me. Part 250. Unbelievable. People think because they have a smartphone, they're lawyers. Beatrice needed that seat. She's the wife of the CEO of Van der Waal Industries. You take care of people like that, David, and they take care of you." David stared at the horizon. "I don't know, Rick. That lady, she seemed pretty calm. You sure she's nobody?" "She's nobody," Holloway dismissed. "If she was somebody, she would have made a scene. She would have screamed. She folded. That's what they do." Meanwhile, back in economy, Seat 34B was a war zone. The toddler was kicking Elena's shin. The man with the tuna sandwich had fallen asleep, his head lolling onto her shoulder. Elena gently pushed the man's shoulder back to his own space. She pressed the call button. 10 minutes passed. No answer. She pressed it again. Finally, Sarah appeared, looking frazzled. She had been running back and forth, serving champagne to first class. When she saw Elena, her face softened into genuine pity. "Miss Vance? Can I get you anything? I can sneak you a glass of wine from the front? Or a meal?" "No, thank you, Sarah," Elena said, her voice steady. "I need something else. I need the in-flight Wi-Fi code, the complimentary one for first-class passengers. Since I paid for first class, I assume I'm entitled to it." "Oh, of course," Sarah said. She wrote the code on a napkin. "Here, it's Sky High VIP." "Thank you. And Sarah?" "Yes? You're doing a good job. Don't let him break you." Sarah's eyes welled up. She nodded quickly and hurried away. Eleanor connected her tablet to the Wi-Fi. She didn't log in to Netflix. She logged into a secure government portal. FTC, Gov, Internal, Admin. She navigated to the personnel database for Meridian Airways. She typed in Halloway, Brock. His file populated. It was thick. Several complaints of unprofessional conduct over the years, all dismissed by middle management. A few citations for missed safety briefings. But nothing that had stuck. He was a Teflon pilot. Nothing stuck to him, because he brought in high-value clients. Elena's eyes narrowed. She pulled up the passenger manifest for Flight 404. She had access to the real-time data via the Federal Oversight link. She saw the alteration. It was logged at 4:15 p.m. Seat 1A reassigned to Vanderwall Beatrice. Reason: operational necessity. Operational necessity, Elena whispered to herself. That was the code for Safety Equipment Transport, or Federal Air Marshals. Using it for a donor's wife was fraud. It was a direct violation of Federal Aviation Code 14, CFR 382. But then, Elena found something even more interesting. She cross-referenced Halloway's flight logs with his mandatory rest periods. It appeared Captain Halloway had flown a charter flight from Cabo San Lucas to Atlanta just 6 hours before this flight. FAA regulations required a minimum of 10 hours of rest between shifts. Halloway was flying illegally. He was fatigued. And he was arrogant. Elena tapped her screen. She opened her email client. She began composing a message. The recipient wasn't customer service. It was the director of flight standards at the FAA, a man named Marcus Thorne. Subject: urgent safety violation, Flight 404. Marcus, I am currently on board Meridian Flight 404. I have been involuntarily downgraded to facilitate a personal favor for the pilot in command, Captain Brock Halloway. Upon review of the digital flight logs via the secure portal, I have reason to believe the PC is in violation of rest requirements, Fortors CFR 117. He is fatigued and acting erratically. I am formally initiating an investigation under my authority as Commissioner. Have a team ready at the gate in D.C. Do not alert the tower yet. I want him to land the plane. E. Vance. She hit send. 20,000 feet in the air, the trap was set. But the drama wasn't over. In first class, Beatrice Vanderwall was complaining that her champagne wasn't cold enough. She snapped her fingers at Sarah. "Boy, go tell the captain I want to say hello," Beatrice slurred, clearly 3 glasses deep. Sarah went to the cockpit and knocked. She entered. "Captain," Sarah said, "Ms. Vanderwall wants to see you." "Send her in," Halloway grinned. "Let's show her the view." "Sir." David, the co-pilot, interjected. "We're in sterile cockpit rules. We're approaching turbulent airspace. No visitors." "Relax, David," Halloway scoffed. It's Beatrice. She's practically family. Don't be such a buzzkill." Beatrice stumbled into the cockpit a moment later, holding her dog. "Oh, look at all the buttons," she squealed. Down in 34B, Elena felt the plane lurch. It wasn't turbulence. It was a sudden, manual jerk of the yoke. She looked out the window. They were banking too hard. Elena unbuckled her seatbelt. The seatbelt sign was on, but she didn't care. She stood up in the aisle of the shaking plane. "Sit down!" the man next to her yelled. Elena ignored him. She reached into her purse and pulled out a leather wallet. She flipped it open. A gold badge gleamed under the cabin lights. Federal Commissioner, United States Government. She began to walk toward the front of the plane. The time for sitting quietly was over. The Boeing 787 rattled again, a sickening sway that had passengers in economy gripping their armrests. The fasten seatbelt sign pinged aggressively, but Dr. Elena Vance was already moving. She moved with a speed and stability that defied the turbulence. In her hand, the gold badge of the Federal Transportation Commission caught the dim overhead reading lights, flashing like a beacon in the gloom of the main cabin. A male flight attendant, a burly man named Greg who had been chatting in the rear galley, stepped into the aisle to block her. "Ma'am, you need to sit down immediately. We are experiencing—" Elena didn't break stride. She raised the wallet, holding the badge inches from his face. Her eyes were hard, stripping away any pretense of customer service politeness. "Federal agent," she lied. Technically. As a commissioner, she had higher clearance than a field agent, but in a crisis, agent got people to move faster. Interference with a federal investigation is a felony carrying a 10-year sentence. "Step aside, Greg." Greg froze. The authority in her voice hit him harder than the turbulence. He pressed himself against the lavatory door, his mouth agape. Elena swept past him. The walk from row 34 to row 1 was long. It felt like walking up a mountain. As she passed through the Economy Plus section, passengers who had watched her walk of shame earlier now looked up in confusion. They saw the steel in her spine. They saw the badge. Whispers broke out. "Is that a marshal? I thought she was just a lady who got bumped. Something's going down." She reached the curtain separating economy from business class. She ripped it aside. The change in atmosphere was instant. The air here was cooler, smelling of warmed nuts and expensive cologne. The passengers here were oblivious to the chaos in the back. Elena marched through business, her gaze fixed forward. She reached the final curtain, the barrier to first class. She stepped through. The scene in first class was a tableau of gross negligence. Beatrice Vanderwall was no longer in the cockpit, but she was standing in the aisle, holding a glass of champagne in one hand and her dog in the other, recounting her tour to the wealthy man in 1B. The cockpit door was currently unlatched, slightly ajar as Sarah, the flight attendant, was trying to hand a tray of coffee to the pilots. This was a critical breach of security protocols. A slightly open cockpit door during flight. Beatrice spotted Eleanor. Her face twisted into a sneer. "Excuse me? You again. I thought the captain told you to stay in the toilet or wherever you people sit. Why are you—" Elena didn't stop. She walked right up to Beatrice. "Sit down," Elena ordered. It wasn't a request. It was a command, barked with the ferocity of a drill sergeant. Beatrice blinked, stunned. "I beg your pardon? Do you know who my husband is? I don't care if your husband is the King of England," Elena snapped, her voice cutting through the cabin noise. "You are an unauthorized civilian who just exited a flight deck during unstable air. You have compromised the safety of 200 souls. Sit down, shut up, and strap in, or I will have you zip-tied to that seat." Beatrice's mouth opened and closed like a fish. The wealthy passengers were staring, their jaws on the floor. No one spoke to Beatrice Vanderwell like that. Beatrice sensing a predator bigger than herself, collapsed into seat 1A, Elena's stolen seat, clutching her dog. Elena turned to Sarah, who was standing by the cockpit door, trembling, the tray of coffee shaking in her hands. "Sarah," Elena said, her voice softening just a fraction. "Step away from the door." "Miss Vance, he's going to be so mad," Sarah whimpered. "He has bigger problems than his temper," Elena said. Elena stepped forward, pushed the door fully open, and stepped onto the flight deck. The cockpit was bathed in the glow of digital instruments. The view out the windshield was a terrifying wall of dark grey clouds. Captain Brock Halloway turned around in his seat, a smile still plastered on his face from his conversation with Beatrice. When he saw Elena standing there, the smile vanished instantly, replaced by a surge of crimson rage. "What the hell?" Halloway roared, reaching for his headset to rip it off. "How did you get in here, Sarah? Why is the passenger from 34B on my flight deck?" David, the co-pilot, looked terrified. He was gripping the yoke, actually flying the plane, while Halloway had been entertaining guests. "Get out!" Halloway unbuckled his harness, turning his massive frame toward her. "I am going to have you arrested the second we touch down. You are hijacking this plane. That is terrorism." "Sit down, Captain," Elena said. She didn't shout. She spoke with a deadly calm that was far more terrifying than his screaming. "You don't give orders here." Halloway lunged to stand up. Elena held up her badge. "Dr. Elena Vance, Federal Transportation Commissioner, badge number 004 Alpha, Oversight Division." Halloway stopped mid-rise. He froze. He squinted at the badge, his brain struggling to process the information. "Commissioner? The people who wrote the budget? The people who signed the licenses?" "I am commandeering authority over this cabin due to gross negligence and violation of federal aviation regulations," Elena continued, her voice clipping along with legal precision. "Specifically, violation of the sterile cockpit rule, unauthorized entry of a civilian during flight, and—" She paused, looking at his eyes. They were red-rimmed, bloodshot. "And suspicion of operating under the influence of fatigue, in violation of 14 CFR Part 117. Halloway slumped back into his seat. It was as if the air had been let out of a balloon. His face went from red to a ghostly white. "Commissioner," he choked out. I didn't know. You thought I was just a black woman you could bully," Elena finished for him. "You thought I was powerless. You thought your stripes made you a god." It was just a misunderstanding," Halloway stammered, his hands shaking. "Beatrice, Ms. Vanderwall, she's a VIP donor. I was just trying to ensure good customer relations. I wasn't fatigued. I'm fine." "I checked your logs, Captain," Eleanor said ruthlessly. "You flew the Cabo charter this morning. You have had 4 hours of sleep in the last 24 hours. You are illegal, and you just let a woman holding a dog play with the flight controls." "She didn't touch anything," Halloway lied. "I felt the bank, Captain," Elena countered, "and the flight data recorder will prove it. The black box listens to everything, including your little jokes about people like me." Halloway looked at David. David looked straight ahead, refusing to make eye contact with his captain. The co-pilot knew the ship was sinking, and he wasn't going to drown with it. "David," Elena said. "Yes, ma'am," David answered instantly. "You have control of the aircraft?" "I have control, ma'am. I've had control for the last 20 minutes. Good. Keep it. Captain Halloway is relieved of duty effective immediately." "You can't do that," Halloway shouted, a last desperate gasp of ego. "You can't relieve a pilot mid-flight." "Read my authority, Captain," Elena said, tossing her badge onto the center console between them. It landed with a heavy thud. "Under Emergency Authority 44 Bravo, If a federal officer deems the Pix as incapacitated or reckless to the point of endangering life, command transfers to the SIC. David is now the pilot in command. She looked at Holloway. Do not touch the controls. Do not talk to ATC. Do not leave this seat. If you so much as sneeze, I will add obstruction of justice to the list of charges I am currently writing in my head. Holloway shrank into his seat. He looked small. The swagger was gone. The granite jaw was trembling. Commissioner, he whispered, his voice cracking, I have a pension. I have 3 years left until retirement. Please, we can work this out. I can upgrade you back. I can get Beatrice to move. Elena looked at him with profound pity. Captain, you didn't just lose your seat, she said coldly. You lost your wings. The remaining hour of the flight was the longest of Brock Holloway's life. Elena didn't leave the cockpit. She pulled down the jump seat, the small, uncomfortable fold-down chair behind the pilots usually reserved for observers, and strapped herself in. She sat there like a gargoyle of justice, watching the back of Holloway's head. The silence in the cockpit was suffocating. The only sounds were the hum of the avionics, the crackle of ATC on the radio, and Holloway's ragged breathing. He was sweating profusely. He kept glancing at the reflection in the window, seeing the dark shape of the woman he had humiliated sitting behind him, writing in a small notebook. Every time he moved his hand, he felt her eyes on him. He was a prisoner in his own kingdom. David, the co-pilot, was flying with the precision of a surgeon. He wanted no part of Holloway's negligence. He communicated with Washington Center crisply and professionally. Meridian 404, descend and maintain flight level 10,000, the radio crackled. 10,000, Meridian 404, David replied. Meridian 404, the controller's voice came back, sounding slightly different. More serious. Be advised, we have a request from the FAA Regional Director to have you taxi to a remote stand upon landing. Ground authorities will meet the aircraft. Do you have a squawk code for us? Holloway flinched. They knew. She had emailed them. David glanced back at Elena. Elena nodded. Center, Meridian 404, David said. We are aware. Situation is under control. Federal personnel on board. Copy that. 404. Holloway put his head in his hands. Jesus, he muttered. They're sending the welcoming committee. You invited them, Brock, Elena said from the back, when you decided to treat the Constitution like a suggestion. As the plane broke through the cloud cover, the lights of Washington, D.C. sprawled out below them. The monuments were glowing white in the distance. It was a city of laws, and they were descending right into the heart of it. Back in the cabin, the atmosphere had shifted. The flight attendants, sensing the change in power, had stopped serving Beatrice. Beatrice was sitting in seat 1A, angrily texting on her phone, unaware that her texts were useless. Sarah walked past 1A, ignoring Beatrice's empty glass, and looked toward the closed cockpit door with a mixture of fear and awe. She realized the quiet woman in the blazer had just saved them all from a disaster. The landing gear deployed with a heavy clunk. 3 greens, David called out. Stabilized, Holloway whispered out of habit. Though he wasn't flying, the runway lights rushed up to meet them. David flared the aircraft perfectly, the wheels kissing the tarmac. The reverse thrusters roared, slowing the massive machine. Usually, the pilot would come on the intercom and welcome everyone to D.C., checking the local time and temperature. Today, the speakers remained silent. David taxied the plane off the main runway, but instead of turning toward the terminal gates where the jet bridges were, he turned right, toward a secluded area of the tarmac, usually reserved for cargo or private jets. Why are we going here? Holloway asked weakly. Through the windshield, the answer was flashing blue and red. 3 black SUVs and 2 airport police cruisers were waiting on the tarmac. Figures in windbreakers with FAA and FBI printed on the back were standing by the vehicles. Halloway looked out the window. He saw the flashing lights reflecting in his eyes. He looked at his hands, the hands that had flown planes for 30 years. They were shaking uncontrollably. "Parking brake set," David announced. "Engine cut off." The whine of the engines died down, replaced by the hum of the auxiliary power unit. Elena unbuckled her jump seat harness. She stood up, smoothing her blazer. "Stay seated, gentlemen," she said. She opened the cockpit door. The first-class cabin was quiet. Everyone was looking out the windows at the police cars surrounding the plane. Beatrice was pressing her face against the glass. "Why are the police here? Did we have a bomb threat?" Elena stepped into the aisle. She looked at Beatrice. "No bomb," Elena said. "Just a removal of hazardous materials." She looked at Sarah. "Open the main cabin door, Sarah. The stairs are being pulled up now." Sarah nodded, her eyes wide. She disarmed the door and rotated the heavy handle. The door swung open, letting in the cool night air and the smell of jet fuel. 2 men in suits walked up the stairs. One was Marcus Thorne, the director of flight standards, a man with a face like a bulldog. "Director," Elena nodded to him. "Commissioner Vance," Thorne replied, shaking her hand. "We got your email. We have the logs. We have the tower recordings." "Good," Elena said. "The pilot is in the cockpit. He is relieved of duty." Thorne signaled to the officers behind him. "Go get him." The entire first-class cabin watched in stunned silence as Captain Brock Halloway, the man who had strutted down the aisle like a king 3 hours ago, was escorted out of the cockpit. His hat was in his hand. His head was bowed. 2 officers held him by the arms. As he passed Elena, he stopped. He looked up at her, his eyes pleading. "I have a family," he whispered. Elena looked at him, her expression unreadable. "So do the people in economy, Captain," she said. "You were willing to risk their lives for your ego. Save your tears for the administrative law judge." They marched him down the stairs, but the karma wasn't done yet. Beatrice Vanderwall stood up, outraged. "Where are they taking Brocky? This is ridiculous. I am calling my husband." Director Thorne looked at Beatrice. He looked at the dog in her arms. He looked at the manifest on his tablet. "Are you Beatrice Vanderwall?" Thorne asked. "Yes, and I demand to be let off this plane first." "You will be let off," Thorne said. "In handcuffs." "What?" Beatrice shrieked. "Interfering with a flight crew, unauthorized access to a flight deck, violating federal safety protocols and—" Thorne looked at the dog. "Smuggling an undeclared animal into a sterile environment. Commissioner Vance says you were operating the controls?" I just touched the yoke, for a second, for a selfie," Beatrice stammered. "That's a federal crime, ma'am," Thorne said. "Officer, take her." As the handcuffs clicked around Beatrice's wrists, the fake fur coat slipping off her shoulders, a sound started from the back of the plane. It was clapping. The passengers in economy, who had been watching through the open curtains, started to cheer. Then the business-class passengers joined in. Even the wealthy elite in first class, tired of Beatrice's screaming, started to applaud. Eleanor stood by the door, watching the trash get taken out. But the story wasn't over. Because as Eleanor stepped off the plane, she knew that Holloway and Beatrice were just the symptoms. The disease was the airline itself, and she wasn't done with Meridian Airways yet. The interrogation room at Dulles International Airport wasn't like the ones on TV. It was a beige, windowless conference room in the airport administration block, smelling faintly of burnt coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. Dr. Elena Vance sat at the head of the table. She wasn't the one being interrogated. She was the one waiting. It had been 2 hours since Flight 404 had landed. Captain Halloway was in a holding cell down the hall. Beatrice Vanderwaal was currently screaming at a TSA agent in the booking area. The door to the conference room opened. A man walked in. He was slick. He wore a 3-piece Italian suit that cost more than a Honda Civic, and his hair was gelled back with aggressive precision. This was Preston Clay, the General Counsel for Meridian Airways. He was the fixer. When planes went down, or pilots misbehaved, Preston Clay made the problems go away. He carried a leather briefcase and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Dr. Vance," Clay said, his voice smooth like oil. "First, let me offer the sincere apologies of the entire Meridian family. What happened tonight was a regrettable lapse in protocol." Eleanor didn't smile back. She had her blue binder open on the table. "Mr. Clay, I was wondering when corporate would show up. You made good time from your office in Arlington." Clay pulled out a chair and sat down, uninvited. He slid a thick envelope across the table. "We want to make this right, Elena. Can I call you Elena?" "You can call me Commissioner Vance," she corrected him, her voice cool. "Commissioner," Clay nodded, not missing a beat. "Inside that envelope is a check for $50,000. Consider it a settlement for the inconvenience, the emotional distress, and the refund of your ticket. Additionally, we are prepared to offer you lifetime platinum status on Meridian Airways." Elena looked at the envelope. She didn't touch it. "And in exchange?" she asked. "In exchange," Clay said, clasping his hands, "we sign a mutual non-disclosure agreement. We agree that tonight's events were a misunderstanding, caused by a technical glitch. Captain Halloway enters an early retirement program quietly. Ms. Vanderwaal pays a small fine for the pet violation, and we all move on." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Look, Commissioner, Halloway is a decorated veteran. He's 2 years from a full pension. If you press these charges, the fatigue, the sterile cockpit violation, the coercion, he loses everything. His pension, his license, his medical. He'll be destitute. Do you really want to ruin a man's life over a seat assignment?" It was a masterclass in manipulation. Clay was trying to make Elena feel like the villain. He was weaponizing empathy. Elena finally reached out. She picked up the envelope. Clay's smile widened. He thought he had her. Everyone had a price. Elena weighed the envelope in her hand. Then she locked eyes with Clay and ripped the envelope in half. The sound of tearing paper was loud in the quiet room. Clay's smile vanished. "You seem to be under a misconception, Mr. Clay," Elena said, dropping the torn pieces onto the table. "You think this is a customer service dispute. You think I am an unhappy passenger looking for a payout." She stood up, leaning her palms on the table, looming over him. "I am not a customer tonight. I am the federal government, and I don't care about Captain Halloway's pension. I care about the 200 people he put at risk because he was too arrogant to sleep and too entitled to follow the law. He flew a commercial airliner while fatigued, purely to boost his own ego and serve a donor. That isn't a mistake. That is malice. Commissioner, be reasonable," Clay stammered, his composure cracking. "A public inquiry will tank our stock price. It will—" "I'm not done," Eleanor cut him off. "I've already pulled the digital flight data recorder audio. I heard what he said about me. I heard him call me nobody. I heard him laugh about breaking the rules for Beatrice Vanderwaal." She pulled a USB drive from her pocket and placed it on the table. "I have a copy. The FAA has a copy. And if you try to bury this, Mr. Clay, I will make sure the Senate Subcommittee on Transportation gets a copy during the prime time hearings next week." Clay stared at the USB drive like it was a radioactive isotope. He realized then that he wasn't dealing with a lawsuit. He was dealing with an executioner. "What do you want?" Clay whispered. "I want a full public inquiry," Elena said. "I want Meridian Airways to be fined the maximum penalty for systematic negligence. I want Halloway's license revoked permanently. And I want a written apology to every single passenger on Flight 404. Clay stood up, grabbing his briefcase. He looked pale. "The board won't like this." "Tell the board," Elena said, "that next time they should check the passenger manifest before they try to bully a black woman in seat 1A. Clay left the room without another word. The bribe lay in tatters on the table. 3 months later, the fallout from Flight 404 hadn't just made the news, it had become a cultural firestorm. The initial leak of the cockpit voice recorder audio, rumored to have been released by a whistleblower within the FAA, had gone viral overnight. The hashtag #InutHawasatshosh Seat 1A was trending globally. The world had heard Captain Brock Halloway's arrogant laugh and his disparaging remarks about people like her. They had heard Beatrice Vanderwall treating a Boeing 787 like her personal toy. The court of public opinion had already reached a verdict. Now it was time for the actual court to do the same. The grand hearing room of the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, in Washington, D.C., was suffocatingly packed. It wasn't just industry insiders. It was a circus. High-powered attorneys, safety advocates, and a sea of reporters jockeyed for space. At the center of the storm sat Captain Brock Halloway. He looked like a ghost of the man who had strutted through the cabin. His skin was sallow, his eyes darting nervously around the room. He wore a grey suit that seemed too loose, hanging off a frame that had shrunk from stress. There were no gold stripes on his shoulders today. To his right sat Beatrice Vanderwall. She was dressed in all black, wearing oversized sunglasses indoors, looking more like she was attending a funeral than a federal hearing. She tapped her manicured nails on the table, whispering furiously to her team of 3 lawyers. And sitting on the elevated dais, flanking the NTSB chairwoman, was Dr. Elena Vance. She wore the same charcoal blazer she had worn on the plane. She didn't look angry. She looked inevitable. "This hearing is now in session," the chairwoman announced, banging the gavel. "We are here to determine the penalties regarding the safety violations on Meridian Airways Flight 404. Halloway's defense attorney, a sharp-nosed man named Mr. Sterling, stood up first. He tried the only tactic he had left, character assassination. "Distinguished members of the board," Sterling began, smoothing his tie. "My client, Captain Halloway, has an exemplary 30-year record. What happened that night was a momentary lapse caused by extreme stress. Furthermore, we argue that Commissioner Vance provoked the situation by refusing a lawful order to change seats, escalating the tension in the cabin." A murmur went through the crowd. He was blaming the victim. Elena leaned forward toward her microphone. The room went deathly silent. "Mr. Sterling," Elena's voice rang out, clear and cold. "Are you suggesting that my refusal to accept an illegal downgrade justifies your client operating an aircraft with only 4 hours of sleep?" "I am saying there were mitigating factors," Sterling stammered. "Let's listen to the mitigating factors," Elena said. She nodded to the technician. "Play Exhibit C14. The audio from the cockpit voice recorder filled the room. It was crystal clear. Halloway's voice, recording. "She's nobody. If she was somebody, she would have made a scene. Beatrice needs that seat. You take care of people like that, David, and they take care of you." Then, the sound of the cockpit door opening. The sound of Beatrice giggling. The sound of a dog barking on the flight deck. And then, The terrifying sound of the autopilot disconnect warning chime. The audio cut off. Halloway squeezed his eyes shut. The shame in the room was palpable. He wasn't just a bad pilot. He was a bully caught on tape. "That," Elena said, pointing a pen at Halloway, "is not stress. That is a transaction. You sold the safety of your passengers for a favor from a donor." The NTSB chairwoman turned to Beatrice. "Ms. Vanderwall, you are heard on the recording, asking to steer the ship." "Did you touch the flight controls?" Beatrice's lawyer stood up. "My client invokes her Fifth Amendment right to—" Beatrice shoved her lawyer's arm down. She stood up, removing her sunglasses. She was used to money-solving everything. "Look, this is ridiculous," Beatrice scoffed, her voice shrill. "I barely touched it. It was a joke. I donate millions to charity. I am a platinum member. I am willing to write a check right now to cover whatever fine you people want so I can go home. I have a spa appointment in Zurich tomorrow." Elena stared at her. The sheer disconnect from reality was staggering. "You think you can write a check for this?" Elena asked softly. "I can write a check for anything," Beatrice snapped. "Can you write a check that stops a 200-ton aircraft from stalling when an untrained civilian yanks the yoke?" Elena countered, "because that is what almost happened." The chairwoman looked at the panel. They didn't need to deliberate. The evidence was overwhelming. "The board has reached a decision," the chairwoman stated. Halloway stood up, his legs shaking. "Captain Brock Halloway," the chairwoman read, "due to willful violation of Federal Aviation Regulations, Part 117 and Part 121, your airline transport pilot certificate is hereby permanently revoked." Halloway gasped. "Revoked? But can I fly cargo? Can I fly private?" "Permanently," the chairwoman repeated. "You will never pilot an aircraft again. Furthermore, the FAA is fining you personally $50,000 for reckless endangerment." Halloway slumped into his chair, burying his face in his hands. It wasn't just a job loss. It was an identity death. The sky was closed to him. "As for Meridian Airways," the chairwoman continued, "a civil penalty of $12 million is levied for systemic negligence and failure to oversee crew rest periods." "And finally, Ms. Vanderwall," Elena spoke up. Beatrice rolled her eyes. Yes. How much is the fine?" "There is no fine," Elena said. Beatrice smiled smugly. "See? I told you." "However," Elena continued, a small, satisfied glint in her eye, "the Department of Homeland Security has reviewed your actions. Attempting to manipulate flight controls falls under the definition of interference with a flight crew. Therefore, effective immediately, you are placed on the federal no-fly list." Beatrice froze. The smile dropped off her face like shattered glass. "Excuse me. You are banned from all commercial aviation within, to or from the United States," Elena declared, "for 10 years. 10 years? Beatrice shrieked. "But I have a house in Paris. I have Fashion Week in Milan. How am I supposed to get there?" "I believe the Queen Mary, too, is a lovely ship," Elena remarked dryly. "It takes 7 days to cross the Atlantic. I suggest you bring a good book." Beatrice began to scream, a full-blown tantrum, as federal marshals moved in to escort her out. The cameras flashed wildly, capturing the image of the Queen of High Society being led away in disgrace. Halloway didn't scream. He just sat there, staring at the table, realizing that the quiet woman in Siat 1A had effectively ended his life as he knew it. 6 months later. Reagan National Airport was bustling with the morning rush. Dr. Elena Vance walked through Terminal B, pulling her small roller bag. She was tired, but it was a good tired. The Halloway Act, a new piece of legislation increasing penalties for pilot fatigue, had just passed the Senate committee. Dr. Vance, Elena turned. Walking toward her was a man in a crisp, perfectly pressed pilot's uniform, 4 stripes on his shoulder. It was David, the former co-pilot of Flight 404. He looked older, more confident. He held his cap in his hand. "Captain Miller," Elena smiled, extending her hand. "It looks good on you." "I owe it to you, ma'am," David said, shaking her hand firmly. Meridian cleaned house after the hearing. They fired the old management. We have strict rest protocols now. The culture has completely changed. "I'm glad to hear it," Elena said. "I'm actually flying the DC to Chicago route today," David said, checking the departure board. "We have a seat open in first class. 1A. I blocked it off specifically for you." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Is that a bribe, Captain?" David laughed. "No, Commissioner. It's respect. And Sarah is the lead flight attendant. She said if I didn't get you on board, she'd strike." Elena chuckled. "Well, we can't have a strike. Lead the way, Captain." As they walked toward the gate, Elena glanced out the window at the tarmac. She saw a baggage handler tossing suitcases onto a cart. The handler paused to wipe sweat from his brow. He turned, and for a split second, Elena recognized the profile. The silver hair was thinner, the posture stooped, the granite jaw covered in grey stubble. It was Brock Halloway. He was wearing a neon yellow safety vest, slinging bags for minimum wage. He looked up at the plane, the machine he used to command, with a look of profound longing and regret. He saw Elena walking down the jet bridge. He froze. Elena didn't stop. She didn't gloat. She simply adjusted her glasses and kept walking. He was the past. She was the future. She boarded the plane, took her seat in 1A, and for the first time in a long time, she fully reclined the chair. "Champagne, Commissioner?" Sarah asked, appearing with a genuine smile. "Yes, Sarah," Elena said, opening her blue binder. "I think I will." And that is the story of how arrogance crashed and burned. Captain Halloway thought his stripes made him untouchable, and Beatrice thought her money made her above the law. But they both learned that when you try to push the wrong person out of the way, you might just get pushed out of the sky. Halloway lost his wings, Beatrice lost her jet-setting lifestyle, and Elena Vance proved that true power isn't about being loud. It's about knowing your rights. If you enjoyed this story of epic karma, please hit that like button. It helps the channel so much. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. And I want to know, do you think a 10-year flight ban was enough for Beatrice, or should she have gone to jail? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.